The elevator jolted with a violent shudder, lurching to a stop somewhere between the 22nd and 23rd floors. For a moment, everything was still, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Justina Valentine wasn't holding hers. She exhaled a sharp, gasping breath, clutching her swollen belly, where a fierce contraction had gripped her at precisely the same moment the lift stopped. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her back against the cold metal wall for support. Sweat already trickled down her spine. She closed her eyes, willing the pain to ebb, but it didn't. Her trembling hand jabbed the emergency button. A shrill beep echoed in the confined space, but no voice came through. Justina jabbed it again. Nothing. Typical. She glanced around. The elevator was small but upscale, brushed steel panels, mirrors polished to a gleam, a faint scent of lemon cleaner. It all screamed luxury, the kind of place she didn't belong. And yet here she was. Her oversized sweatshirt was damp with sweat, her jeans barely fitting over her swollen stomach. She was 22, broke, alone, and now apparently about to give birth on the floor of a corporate skyscraper. Another contraction hit, harder than the first, stealing her breath. She gritted her teeth, lowering herself awkwardly to the floor, legs splayed out, one hand bracing her against the cool tile. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to cry. She had been through worse. Orphaned at 6, she had been passed from one foster home to another like an unwanted parcel, always too loud, too stubborn, too much. The system had swallowed her whole, and when she aged out at 18, it spit her back into the world with no family, no guidance, no love. She had clawed her way through the years since, working under-the-table jobs, cleaning apartments, washing dishes, scrubbing toilets. Every naira she earned was stretched thin to cover rent, food, the basics. She thought she was cautious. Careful. But then there was that night, that stupid, reckless night. She didn't even remember much: bright lights, loud music, a free drink she never should have accepted. The charity gala had been a cleaning gig, a quick job for a quick paycheck, but somehow she found herself swept up in the glamour, the champagne, the moment. And him. Tall. Magnetic. Warm brown skin and sharp dark eyes that seemed to look right through her. They had danced. Talked. Laughed. Then, somewhere between the rooftop terrace and the hotel suite, the details blurred. When she woke up the next morning, alone, she promised herself she would forget him. And she tried. For months, she tried. Until the pregnancy test stared back at her, two unflinching pink lines sealing her fate. A strangled sob escaped her lips as the pain surged again. She tried to remember the breathing techniques she read about: in through the nose, out through the mouth. Deep breaths. Calm thoughts. She pressed her forehead against the wall. "You can't do this here," she told herself. "Not like this. Not alone." The elevator doors rattled slightly, and she tensed. Was someone trying to get in? "Hello?" she croaked out, voice hoarse. No answer. Seconds later, she heard it, the unmistakable ding of the elevator being accessed from outside. The doors slid open a crack and stuck, jammed halfway. Through the gap, she saw a man's figure, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed sharply in a tailored dark suit. He crouched, trying to wedge his way inside. Their eyes met. His were dark and sharp, filled with immediate concern. His suit looked expensive, custom-made, and he had the polished look of someone who belonged in places like this. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he ducked down and squeezed through the gap, landing inside with a soft thud. "What happened?" he asked, glancing at the panel. "Are you hurt?" Justina opened her mouth to answer, but a contraction gripped her again, and she could only clutch her stomach and whimper. His face changed instantly, all business now. He knelt beside her, setting down the leather briefcase he carried. "You're in labor," he said. "No kidding. I think so, she managed between clenched teeth. All right. He shrugged off his jacket and folded it, placing it under her head. How far apart are the contractions? I didn't time them, she admitted, fresh panic rising. He glanced at his watch. Okay. We'll figure it out. Another contraction hit, quicker this time, and she cried out despite herself. The man's hand hovered awkwardly over her shoulder. I'm Daniel, he said, voice low and steady. Daniel Blake. You're going to be all right. Justina closed her eyes, trying to focus on the sound of his voice rather than the tearing pain in her body. Breathe with me, he said, matching her shaky inhales and exhales. Minutes blurred together in a haze of pain and panic. The elevator remained stubbornly stuck. Daniel took over, pulling out his phone, trying to call emergency services, but the signal was dead. He pounded the elevator wall. Come on. No response. He turned back to her, jaw tight. We're not getting help fast enough. We might have to do this here. Terror rose up, thick and suffocating. I can't do this, she whispered. Yes, you can, he said firmly. You have to. And I'll help you. She stared at him, this stranger in a custom suit, with expensive cufflinks and polished shoes, now kneeling on the dirty floor of an elevator, ready to deliver a stranger's baby. No offense, she gasped between contractions, but you don't look like you know what you're doing. A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. I don't. But we're out of options. He moved quickly, laying out his jacket, helping her ease onto her back. He rolled up his sleeves, took a deep breath, and locked eyes with her. Okay, Justina, he said, on the next contraction, you push. She gritted her teeth. Another wave came, and she bore down, the pressure unbearable. Daniel coached her, his voice steady and calm. You're doing great. Keep going. Time lost meaning. She didn't know how long she pushed, cried, screamed. Sweat poured down her face, soaking her hair. Her body felt torn in half. And then, a wail. A sharp, beautiful, life-affirming cry. Daniel, looking stunned, held a tiny, slippery infant, quickly wrapping the baby in his undershirt. One down, he said, a little breathless. But Justina knew better. The ultrasound technician's face had been carefully neutral when she told her the news months ago. There's more, Justina croaked. Daniel's eyes widened. More. Triplets, she said weakly. Daniel blinked, processing that. Then he nodded grimly. All right. Triplets. We can do this. By the time the second and third babies arrived, both screaming healthy cries, Justina was half-conscious. Daniel wrapped each of them as best he could, using whatever spare fabric he could find. Finally, the elevator doors creaked open, a team of paramedics bursting in, radios crackling, faces tight with urgency. Daniel stood back, dazed, as they worked, lifting Justina onto a stretcher, bundling the infants with practiced hands. She caught Daniel's hand as they wheeled her out. Thank you, she whispered. He squeezed her fingers. You're incredible. They wheeled her away before she could say anything else. Daniel stood there, alone in the wrecked elevator, his shirt ruined, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't even know her last name. And he didn't realize, not yet, that he was more than just the man who helped her that day. He was the father. The sirens were wailing in the distance, but they sounded miles away to Daniel Blake. Inside the cramped elevator, time felt suspended. The metallic walls blurred at the edges of his vision. The only thing clear, the only thing real, was the woman before him, Justina Valentine, sweat-drenched, pale, but astonishingly focused. And the tiny, squirming life he held in his trembling hands. The newborn cried, a thin wail that cut through the heavy air. Daniel's heart lurched at the sound, raw, vulnerable, demanding the world acknowledge its arrival. He wasn't a man prone to sentimentality. Years in business had hardened him, taught him that emotions were liabilities. But this cracked something open in him he hadn't known was sealed shut. He fumbled for his jacket, one arm still cradling the slippery infant. Peeling off his shirt with hurried, clumsy fingers, he wrapped the baby securely, cradling the tiny body against his chest to keep it warm. Justina, panting heavily, tried to lift her head to see, but her strength failed her. Her head flopped back against the floor. "Girl or boy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel glanced down, hesitated, then smiled. "A girl. You have a daughter." Her lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. But there was no time to savor the moment. A low moan escaped her lips, and her body tensed again. Daniel's moment of awe vanished, replaced by a sharp stab of panic. "Another one's coming," she gasped. He nodded quickly, forcing calm into his voice. Okay. You did great with the first. We'll get through the next." Triplets, he reminded himself. He didn't have time to be terrified. He laid the newborn carefully on his folded jacket, positioning her safely against the wall of the elevator. Then he turned back to Justina, kneeling by her side. She gritted her teeth, sweat streaming down her face, her hands clawing for purchase on the slick floor. "Justina, listen to me," Daniel said, his voice low and even. "You're strong. You've already done this once. Focus on your breathing." Her eyes, dark and desperate, locked onto his. "Push with the next contraction," he coached. When it came, her scream was a guttural thing, tearing out of her as she bore down. Daniel positioned himself, heart hammering, praying he didn't mess this up. Minutes, or was it hours? Later, another tiny cry filled the elevator. Daniel exhaled shakily, reaching for the new life. This time, a boy. He quickly wrapped the newborn in his undershirt, glancing between the two babies, now nestled side by side. His brain tried to catalog what they needed: warmth, clean cloth, someone more qualified than him. "Two down," he said, managing a strained smile. Justina barely acknowledged him, her head lolling weakly. She was pale, too pale, and trembling. Daniel's stomach twisted. "Stay with me, Justina," he urged, squeezing her hand. She blinked slowly, her lashes sticking together. "Third one," she whispered hoarsely. "Almost, done." Daniel fought the rising tide of fear. He had never felt this helpless in his life, not in boardrooms or negotiations, not even when his father died and left him with a crumbling company at 22. This was different. This was life, raw and unfiltered, and he was wholly unprepared. The third contraction came swiftly. Justina barely had time to steel herself before her body convulsed again. She pushed, sobbing, her strength all but gone. Daniel caught the third infant, smaller than the others, frilier. His heart seized. "Please breathe," he thought frantically. A second later, the baby let out a thin, reedy cry, and Daniel's legs nearly gave out in relief. Another boy. He bundled the third triplet carefully, checking on all three. They were tiny, pink, and angry, but alive. He couldn't ask for more. Justina slumped back, eyes closed, chest heaving. Daniel leaned over her. "Justina. Stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered. She gave him a weak, satisfied smile. "We made it." "You made it," he corrected, squeezing her hand. "You're incredible." The elevator suddenly jolted, a low whine of machinery, then a slow descent. Daniel barely registered it, he was too busy checking that the babies were secure, that Justina was still breathing steadily. The doors slid open on the ground floor. Chaos. Paramedics flooded in, radios squawking, hands moving quickly and efficiently. Daniel stood back, dazed, as they worked, stabilizing Justina, assessing the newborns, rattling off medical jargon. One of the paramedics, a short woman with a no-nonsense air, barked orders. "We need to get them to the hospital, now." Daniel hovered, unsure if he should follow. Justina, already on a stretcher, turned her head toward him. Her eyes found his, still dark and luminous despite everything. "Thank you," she whispered. The words hit him harder than he expected. He stepped closer, gently touching her wrist. "You're welcome. You're amazing." Her hand squeezed his, weak but deliberate. And then she was gone, whisked away down the hallway, the three babies following in tiny rolling bassinets. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring after them, his heart hammering. He hadn't even asked her last name. The hospital waiting room was a blur of white walls, sterile floors, and buzzing fluorescent lights. Daniel sat hunched in a hard plastic chair, elbows on his knees, shirt sleeves still rolled up, his expensive suit rumpled beyond repair. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, texts from Tund, missed calls from the board, urgent emails stacking up, but he ignored them all. All he could see was Justina's face. The raw strength in her eyes. The quiet gratitude. The three tiny faces he had helped bring into the world. He didn't even know her. Not really. But he couldn't walk away. A nurse finally approached, a tablet in her hands. She gave him a polite, professional smile. "You're Mr. Blake?" "Yes. The mother and babies are stable," she said. "She's resting. It was a rough labor, but she's strong. The babies are in the NICU, precautionary, but they're doing well considering their early arrival." Daniel sagged with relief. "She left something for you," the nurse added. She handed him a folded piece of paper. Curious, Daniel unfolded it. A name, scrawled in shaky handwriting, Justina Valentine. No phone number. No address. Just a name. Daniel stared at it, committing it to memory. Justina Valentine. He rose from the chair, running a hand through his hair. Part of him wanted to storm the hospital room, to see her, to demand answers, but what would he say? What right did he have? He was a stranger who happened to be there when fate intervened. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than coincidence. He folded the paper carefully and slid it into his wallet. Weeks passed. Daniel returned to his life, the towering office, the endless meetings, the ruthless grind of the corporate world. But something was different. He moved through his days with a strange emptiness gnawing at his chest. He tried to find her. He sent quiet inquiries to the hospital, nothing. No forwarding address, no contact information. He hired a private investigator, discreet, thorough, but the trail was cold. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, taking her three miracles with her. Daniel told himself to let it go. He had a company to run, investors to satisfy, deals to close. Life didn't slow down for fairy tales. But at night, when the city lights flickered outside his penthouse window and the world fell silent, he thought of her. Justina Valentine. The woman who had stormed into his life in an elevator between two floors and changed everything. The days after the delivery blurred into one another. Justina Valentine lay in her hospital bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling tiles, listening to the steady beeps of machines monitoring her triplets in the adjoining neonatal ward. The nurses floated in and out like quiet ghosts, adjusting monitors, checking her vitals, leaving warm, encouraging smiles but few words. Outside her window, Lagos pulsed with life, cars honking, engines revving, voices rising and falling, but inside, everything was still. Still, except for her heart. She had given birth to three perfect, tiny humans. And she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. No friends. No family. No one waiting in the lobby to bring her flowers or balloons or to beam at her babies. No one, except for him. Daniel Blake. She hadn't expected him to stay. She certainly hadn't expected him to sit alone for hours in that sterile waiting room. He wasn't part of her life, not really. A stranger who'd happened to be there when her world split open. And yet, when the nurse handed her the small folded piece of paper, his name scribbled at the top, the neat, strong handwriting, she knew he hadn't simply vanished. He had stayed. Still, it didn't matter. Daniel Blake was a man of the skyscrapers, the boardrooms, the billionaire deals. Men like him didn't belong in her world. Justina knew the system. She knew what they would say, a young, unmarried mother with no stable income, no home fit for children, and she refused to let the system decide for her. So she made a decision. Late at night, when the hospital lights dimmed and the halls grew quiet, Justina slipped out of her bed, wincing at the pain in her body. She moved like a ghost, careful and slow, gathering the few belongings she had, a threadbare backpack, a faded hoodie, the slip-on shoes she wore the day she stumbled into the skyscraper. She shuffled into the neonatal unit. The nurse on duty, a kind older woman named Nurse Amaka, looked up from her desk and smiled gently. "Can't sleep?" she asked. Justina shook her head, keeping her movements casual. "Just wanted to see them. One more time." Amaka nodded, sympathy in her eyes. "Go ahead. They're fighters, just like their mother." The triplets were swaddled tightly in their bassinets, tiny chests rising and falling in sleep. Justina's heart clenched. She reached into her backpack, pulling out 3 small blankets, the only soft things she could afford, and laid one gently over each baby. She whispered their names, barely audible, her voice trembling. "Adiz, my princess. Shinonso, my second strength. Ifani, my miracle." She kissed each tiny forehead, lingering longer with each child. "I'll find a way," she whispered. "I promise you." Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough. She left a note at the nurse's station, a simple, heartfelt explanation, no drama, no accusations, and slipped away into the night. Daniel arrived the next morning, his heart light for the first time in weeks. He carried a bouquet. Not the usual roses or lilies, but sunflowers, bright, warm, hopeful. He hated hospitals, the sterile smell, the way they hummed with waiting and wanting, but today felt different. He had decided. He wasn't sure what role he wanted in her life, he barely knew her, but he couldn't shake the pull he felt toward her and the babies. He wouldn't just walk away. Not after what they had survived together. He nodded at the nurse behind the desk. "Justina Valentine, room 304. The nurse's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, sir. She's not here anymore." Daniel's heart stumbled. "What do you mean, not here?" The nurse tapped at her computer, checking again. "She was discharged early this morning. Against medical advice." He set the flowers down, hands tightening into fists. "Where did she go?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Blake. She didn't leave any forwarding address." The nurse hesitated, then added softly, "But she did leave something for you." She handed him a small envelope. Daniel ripped it open, his fingers clumsy. Inside, a short note in that same shaky handwriting. "Thank you for being my strength when I had none. I have to do this my way. Please don't look for me. Justina." Daniel stared at the words, reading them over and over, hoping they would make sense on the second or third pass. They didn't. She was gone. He sank into the nearest chair, the note trembling in his hand. For a moment, the sounds of the hospital, the distant beeping, the shuffling feet, the low murmurs, faded away, and there was only the dull, aching emptiness she had left behind. He had known her for less than 24 hours. He didn't even know her favorite color, her dreams, her fears. And yet, her absence left a hollow, echoing space inside him he didn't know how to fill. Daniel rose slowly, pocketing the note. He picked up the sunflowers and carried them to the reception desk. "Can you make sure these get to the neonatal unit?" he asked quietly. "For her babies." The nurse smiled gently. "Of course." He walked out of the hospital, the morning sun already glaring against the glass of the skyscrapers. He loosened his tie, the crisp air catching in his throat. He would respect her wishes. He wouldn't look for her. But deep down, he knew, some people didn't just brush past your life. Some people stayed with you, whether you saw them again or not. Weeks turned into months. Daniel threw himself into work, board meetings, investment calls, late nights in his office with only the city lights for company. But no matter how many deals he closed, how many milestones he hit, there was always a shadow of something missing. He donated anonymously to the hospital's neonatal unit. He found himself reading books on newborn care in the dead of night, the pages worn from flipping. And sometimes, in his dreams, he was back in that elevator, the hum of the machinery, the flickering lights, the tiny cries that changed his life. On the other side of the city, Justina built a new life, stone by stone, breath by breath. She found shelter in a small community home for single mothers. She picked up cleaning jobs, odd shifts at the market, anything to put food on the table. It wasn't much. But every night, when she tucked Adiz, Shinonso, and Ifani into bed, she knew she had made the right choice. She had chosen them. She had chosen freedom. But sometimes, when the babies were asleep and the world outside was quiet, she would trace the memory of strong hands catching her newborns, of a man's voice steadying her through her fear. Daniel Blake. She whispered his name into the darkness sometimes, a prayer or a thank you, she wasn't sure. And though she told herself she would never see him again, some small part of her hoped, foolishly, wildly, that their story wasn't quite finished. The rain hammered against the tin roofs, a wild, angry music that drowned out the noise of the city. Lagos, usually buzzing and sharp, was blurred tonight, puddles gathering at the street corners, headlights refracting like halos through sheets of water. Justina Valentine pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and stared up at the gray sky as if it might have mercy. It didn't. Water streamed from the awnings and flooded the broken sidewalks, turning the market into a ghost town of shuttered stalls and overturned crates. She was stranded. The last Danfo bus had long since disappeared into the downpour. No taxis. No Okadas daring the flooded streets. Only the heavy smell of wet earth and the cold reality of the storm settling into her bones. She shoved her hands into the pockets of her skirt, feeling the meager coins she had earned that day, not enough for a room, not enough even for bread. She should have headed home earlier, but she stayed late cleaning the tiny cafe, hoping the manager would notice her work ethic and offer her more hours. Now, she was trapped, soaked, and cold. A crack of thunder split the sky. Justina flinched, stepping back into the shallow shelter of a crumbling concrete overhang. It offered little protection. She was still getting drenched. Across the street, the glass facade of a sleek office building glowed warmly. The kind of place Justina knew she'd never belong. Men in sharp suits and women in high heels hurried from the lobby, umbrellas blooming like black flowers. She sighed. And then she saw him. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, paused under the awning of the building. He wasn't carrying an umbrella, just a leather briefcase tucked under one arm, and he looked, stranded too, oddly. His dark skin glistened under the rain, and his face, turned up toward the sky, wore an expression Justina couldn't quite place. Not frustration. Not hurry. Something closer to weariness. Their eyes met across the rain-slicked street. He hesitated. So did she. Daniel Blake hadn't meant to stay late. Meetings ran over, deals dragged, and by the time he stepped out of the building, the storm was already in full fury. His driver had called in sick, and the street was a river. His phone had no signal. Typical. He should have been angry. Should have barked orders and found a solution. But instead, he stood there, feeling the cold soak through his shirt, staring into the chaos of rain and mud. And then, her. She wasn't like the women he usually met downtown, all heels and gloss. She stood small but defiant under the pathetic concrete shelter, soaked to the skin but proud somehow, chin lifted. A lightning flash lit the space between them for a heartbeat. Without thinking, Daniel crossed the street. The water splashed around his shoes, seeping into the expensive Italian leather, but he didn't care. He stopped a few feet from her, hands raised slightly, as if approaching a startled animal. "You're going to get sick," he said, raising his voice over the roar of the storm. She shrugged, a small, sardonic smile tugging at her mouth. "Already am." Daniel laughed. Not the polished chuckle he used at board meetings, but a real, rough sound he hadn't heard from himself in a long time. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. "No," she glanced away, embarrassed. Daniel studied her. She couldn't have been more than 20. Clothes faded but neat. Hair damp, curling at her temples. Eyes dark and wary, the eyes of someone who had been disappointed too many times to expect anything better. "Come on," he said impulsively. "There's a shop up the street. If they haven't closed yet, we can wait out the rain." She eyed him skeptically. "I'm not trying to sell you anything," he added, smiling. Her lips twitched. A moment's hesitation, then she nodded. Together, they navigated the flooded sidewalk, Daniel holding his briefcase over her head like a makeshift umbrella. She laughed, a sharp, sudden sound, and he realized with a start that he liked the sound of it. The shop was a tiny buka tucked into a corner. Plastic chairs, a rusting tin roof, steam rising from pots of hot jollof rice and fried plantains. It smelled of pepper and spice and comfort. Daniel ordered 2 bowls. She protested. He insisted. They sat side by side on plastic chairs, the rain drumming like a heartbeat overhead. Justina kept glancing at him, as if trying to solve a riddle. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Daniel." She gave a small nod. Didn't offer hers. They ate in silence for a while. She was hungrier than she let on, he could tell by the way she tried to eat slowly, savoring every bite. "You work around here?" he asked, trying to keep it light. She shook her head. "Clean a cafe. Over on Adeola Odiku." "You. Up there." He jerked a thumb toward the skyscraper, feeling foolish. "Martek." Her eyes widened slightly. "CEO." He blinked. How had she guessed? "You don't have the look," she said, smirking. "What look?" "The, I'm better than you, look." She mimicked a snobby face, and he laughed again. "No," he admitted. "Not tonight." They finished their meal. The rain didn't stop. The night stretched between them, quiet, heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Daniel stood. "Come on. I'll walk you somewhere safer." "I don't have anywhere safer," she said, the words slipping out before she could catch them. Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't offer money, she wouldn't take it, he could tell, but he couldn't just leave her. Instead, he did something reckless. Something he wouldn't have done any other night. "There's a guest house a few streets over. Decent place. I'll pay for a night. No strings." She hesitated. Stared at him, hard. "Promise?" she said. "Promise." The walk was short, but the rain made it feel longer. They ducked into the lobby, peeling paint, a tired receptionist, the air thick with mildew. Daniel paid for the room, handed over the key. Justina took it, still skeptical. He turned to leave. But she touched his arm, a light, tentative brush. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the food." He nodded. She watched him go. But something stopped him at the door, the rain still lashing the street, the night still lonely, and he turned back. "Wait," he said. She raised a brow. "Have a drink with me. Just one." To the rain. Justina smiled, slow, genuine, and against all logic, against all caution, she nodded. And that was how the night turned, not into a story of seduction or foolishness, but something quieter. Two people, strangers, sharing laughter, sharing silence, sharing shelter from the storm. Later, when Justina lay on the narrow bed staring at the cracked ceiling, she didn't feel regret. She felt, for the first time in a long time, human. When she woke in the morning, Daniel was gone. A note left behind. "Stay dry, Justina." The triplets' cries filled the tiny room, their voices competing in a symphony of need. Justina Valentine rocked back and forth on the thin foam mattress, a threadbare blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her body aching, her spirit fraying. Shinonso whimpered the loudest tonight. Adiz had settled after being fed, her little fingers curled tightly around a piece of Justina's worn scarf. Ifani was wide-eyed and restless, refusing sleep. The shelter was quiet except for the hum of the old generator sputtering weakly outside. Other mothers slept behind thin curtains partitioning their tiny spaces. The smell of boiled beans lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the sharp scent of disinfectant the volunteers used during the day. Justina bounced Shinonso gently against her chest, whispering a quiet lullaby her own mother once sang, before the world stole her mother and her childhood in one cruel sweep. She was tired. God, she was tired. Some nights, exhaustion sat heavy on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Yet every morning, when she saw their tiny faces, every hardship reset itself. She had chosen them, Adiz, Shinonso, Ifani. And she would choose them again and again, no matter the cost. Still, she wondered. Late at night when sleep evaded her, what it would have been like if she hadn't left the hospital so quickly. If she hadn't disappeared before Daniel Blake could become more than a fading memory. Across the city, Daniel sat in the dark, the glow of the city lights filtering through his penthouse windows. His desk was littered with contracts and proposals, but his eyes weren't on them. They were fixed on a framed photograph. It wasn't a personal photo, he didn't have many of those, but an image of the Martech headquarters at sunset, all glass and steel and ambition. It used to mean something to him, progress, success, proof that he had built something from nothing. Now, it felt empty. Soulless. He leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie, and closed his eyes. He saw her face more often than he liked to admit, the determined tilt of her chin, the curve of her smile when he wasn't looking, the softness in her eyes when she thought he didn't notice. He didn't even know her full story. He only knew what he saw, resilience forged by hardship, dignity despite poverty, strength cloaked in gentleness. And then there were the babies. He thought of them, too, those tiny lives he had helped deliver into the world. He wondered if they were healthy, if they had her smile, if they would ever know who he was. The private investigator he had hired found nothing. No records, no forwarding address. Justina Valentine had vanished, and Daniel wasn't sure if he admired or resented her for it. In the mornings, Justina took the triplets to the community center's free childcare program, a humble setup with worn mats and plastic toys. It was noisy, crowded, but safe. Then she went to work. She cleaned apartments, real apartments this time, ones with real pay. She scrubbed floors until her back ached, polished windows until her arms trembled. She smiled politely at the tenants, kept her head down, and saved every naira she could spare. Dreams of a small shop flickered at the edges of her mind, a tailoring business maybe. She used to sew. She still remembered how, though the sewing machine at the shelter's communal room was barely functional. She pushed those dreams aside for now. Survival came first. Every naira she earned fed her babies. Bought soap. Paid for cheap medicine when Adiz caught a cold. Every spare second was a battle, to keep going, to keep hoping, to keep believing. She hadn't seen Daniel again. She wasn't sure she ever would. Daniel tried to move forward. He expanded Marteka's initiatives, launched a new scholarship program for underprivileged students, donated anonymously to maternity clinics, funded community outreach in neighborhoods most CEOs avoided even driving through. He told himself it was just business, good PR. But late at night, when the skyscrapers of Lagos sparkled like distant stars, he knew better. He was searching for her. Not with maps or investigators. With the kind of searching that came from a hollow space in his chest he couldn't seem to fill. 6 months passed. Seasons shifted. The triplets learned to sit up, to babble, to smile those gummy, glorious smiles that made Justina forget how weary she was. They were growing, becoming more themselves each day, and with every milestone, Justina felt a fresh pang, a hollow space she didn't want to name. She didn't think about Daniel. Not often. Only when Shinonso giggled in a way that reminded her of the rough laugh he gave her that rainy night. Only when Adiz stared with wide, observant eyes so like his. Only when Ifani clenched his tiny fists with the same stubbornness she remembered in Daniel's jaw. Some nights, she hated herself for hoping he might find her anyway. Other nights, she hated herself for leaving the door open. Daniel sat in yet another endless board meeting, watching the presentations flick past without seeing them. A knock at the door. Tund, his ever-efficient assistant, leaned in. "Sir, someone from the Iowa Community Center is here. They're requesting a meeting about the education grant." Daniel blinked. He had approved the grant weeks ago. Tund cleared his throat, hesitant. "It's a woman. She said her name is Justina Valentine." Daniel stood so quickly his chair skidded backward. "Send her in," he said, voice tight. He smoothed his tie, heart pounding harder than it should. A moment later, she stepped into the room. She was the same, and yet not. Thinner, perhaps. Older somehow. But her eyes, still dark, still luminous, still defiant. She wore a simple dress, clean but faded, and carried herself with the same quiet strength that had drawn him in on that rainy night. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then, she smiled. Not a wide smile, but a real one, tired, cautious, but real. "Hello, Daniel," she said. And just like that, the space between them, the months, the silence, all of it fell away. For a moment, the boardroom stood still, the air thick, the city's pulse beyond the glass windows faint and far away. Daniel Blake rose slowly, his hands at his sides, every movement deliberate. His heart hammered against his ribs, and for once, he couldn't summon a single polished word. Justina stood just inside the door, clutching a thin folder against her chest, her shoulders drawn back in quiet defiance. She looked different, not in a way that years could explain, but in the way storms shape rivers. Stronger. Sharper. Wiser. He had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, in dreams and half-finished thoughts, but reality hollowed him out. She was real. She was here. "Justina," he said at last, his voice low and uneven. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Daniel." The room stretched wide and empty between them. A woman in a tailored skirt suit, the grant coordinator, cleared her throat awkwardly. "Sir, we can reschedule if..." "No." Daniel's eyes didn't leave Justina's. "We'll continue." Justina gave a small, grateful nod, as if sparing him the trouble of politeness. The coordinator quickly gathered her things and slipped out, leaving the two of them alone. Daniel gestured to the seat across from his, the huge mahogany table between them gleaming under the overhead lights. Justina hesitated for a fraction of a second, then moved forward and sat down. She laid the folder carefully in front of her, her fingers smoothing the worn edges. He sat too, but it felt strange, sitting, pretending this was just another business meeting when nothing about it was ordinary. I didn't expect. He trailed off. Neither did I, Justina said quietly. She glanced down at the folder, gathering herself. I'm here representing the Iowol Community Center. We're applying for a continuation of the education grant Martech sponsors. Her voice was steady. Professional. Daniel swallowed, trying to focus on the words and not the weight of what lay unspoken between them. You're working there now? He asked, unable to keep the curiosity from his voice. I volunteer. I help with the mother's program, she said. And I'm starting a sewing workshop, vocational training for the women. Of course she was. He nodded, forcing his mind back to the document she slid across the table. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, a fleeting contact that sent a current through his skin. That sounds incredible, he said. You're incredible. She gave a small, tight smile, not unkind, but guarded. He opened the folder and scanned the contents, a neat proposal outlining training sessions, equipment needs, impact projections. It was solid. More than solid. Justina had done her homework. You wrote this? She lifted her chin. I did. Impressive. She shrugged lightly, but there was pride in the tilt of her shoulders. Daniel leaned back, studying her. You disappeared, he said softly. She flinched almost imperceptibly but held his gaze. I had to. You could have stayed. I couldn't, she said, a hint of steel in her voice. I didn't have your life, Daniel. I didn't have choices. I had babies who needed me more than I needed to explain myself to you. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He had thought 1,000 things back then, abandonment, regret, resentment, but now, seeing the fire in her eyes, he understood. She hadn't run away. She had run toward something. You never told me about them, he said carefully. Her expression softened slightly. It didn't seem fair. Fair. He blinked. You didn't ask for that night. You didn't ask for them. I didn't want to trap you into something you didn't choose. Daniel shook his head, a humorless laugh escaping him. I would have chosen. Justina's lips parted, but no words came. You don't believe me, he said, not as a question. I believe you believe that, she said finally, her voice gentle but sad. But back then, you were a stranger. And I was scared. The silence that followed wasn't angry or awkward, it was heavy with the weight of years and choices. Daniel closed the folder carefully and set it aside. How are they? He asked. His voice was almost a whisper. Justina's entire face changed, lit from within by a quiet, fierce pride. They're beautiful. Healthy. Strong. Adiz, Shinonso, and Ifani. He smiled despite himself. You named them. Of course. I'd like to meet them, he said, the words tumbling out before he could weigh them. Justina froze, her fingers tightening on the edge of the table. You don't have to decide now, he said quickly. But I'd like to. She studied him, weighing the sincerity in his face, the tension in his posture. They're not babies anymore, she said finally. They're little people. And they don't know you. I can change that, he said simply. She breathed out slowly. One step at a time. He nodded. A tentative truce. Your proposal, Daniel said, clearing his throat. It's approved. Fully funded. Relief flickered across her face, but she masked it quickly with a professional nod. Thank you. You earned it. They stood at the same time, an awkward mirror. Justina gathered her folder. Daniel watched her, afraid that if he blinked, she'd vanish again. Would you? He hesitated, would you have lunch with me? Not business. Just lunch. She looked at him for a long moment, searching, questioning. "Okay," she said finally. "Just lunch." His smile broke loose then, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. Outside, the Lagos sun blazed, and the city moved on, indifferent to the tiny revolution unfolding in a glass tower high above its streets. Inside, two people, no longer strangers, not quite family, walked out side by side into a future neither of them could have predicted. But somehow, maybe, had always been meant to find. Lunch was a small, quiet affair at a tucked-away restaurant in Victoria Island, the kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone was too busy with their own lives to notice two people navigating the uncharted waters between them. Daniel had chosen it carefully, mindful that Justina didn't seem the type who would feel comfortable with fanfare. He was right. She sat across from him in a simple navy dress, her posture relaxed but her eyes constantly scanning, as if she couldn't quite settle into ease. He didn't blame her. There was too much unsaid, too much unasked. Over plates of jollof rice and peppered chicken, they spoke cautiously at first, about the community center, about Lagos traffic, about safe, easy things. But as the meal wore on, the conversation deepened. "Ifani loves to climb," Justina said, smiling faintly as she stirred her drink. "He tries to climb everything, the chairs, the tables, the other babies." Daniel chuckled. "Sounds like trouble." "The best kind." Her smile softened. "Adiz is quieter. She watches everything. Takes her time. Shinonso, he's my chatterbox. Talks from morning till night, even if half of it's gibberish." Daniel watched her carefully, absorbing the light in her eyes when she spoke of them. The fierce pride, the exhausted love. He leaned forward slightly. "I'd like to meet them. When you're ready." Justina sobered, setting her glass down. "They've never had a father. I don't want to be a stranger to them," he said, voice low. "I missed enough already." "They're not a responsibility you're obligated to fulfill, Daniel," she said carefully. "You owe them nothing." He shook his head. "It's not about obligation." She looked at him, long and searching, and he held her gaze. "I want to," he said simply. The silence between them was not tense this time, it was full, heavy with something fragile and new. She nodded once. One step at a time. They met again 2 days later. This time at the community center. Daniel arrived early, pacing the cracked pavement outside the modest building. His driver had offered to wait, but Daniel had waved him off. He needed to do this alone. When Justina stepped outside with the triplets, Shinonso clinging to her skirts, Adiz on her hip, and Ifani stubbornly toddling behind, Daniel's breath caught. They were perfect. Tiny, beautiful reflections of her, but as they got closer, he saw traces of himself too. The set of Shinonso's jaw. The deep gaze in Adiz's eyes. The way Ifani held himself, stubborn and defiant. Shinonso stared up at him, wary but curious. Adiz tucked her face shyly into Justina's shoulder. Ifani, bold as ever, walked right up to Daniel and tugged at his pant leg. Daniel crouched down to his level, heart in his throat. "Hey there," he said softly. Ifani studied him for a beat, then grinned, a big, toothy, gap-toothed smile, and plopped himself right onto Daniel's knee as if claiming him. Daniel laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. Justina chuckled too, shifting Adiz and reaching for Shinonso, who was now half hiding behind her. "They're a lot," she warned. "I can handle it," Daniel said, still smiling at Ifani, who was happily examining Daniel's wristwatch. Inside, the center was a flurry of activity, women cooking in the shared kitchen, children chasing each other around, volunteers sorting donated clothes. It was noisy, chaotic, full of life. Daniel sat cross-legged on the worn rug while the triplets crawled and babbled around him. He was painfully aware of the way the mothers whispered and stared, the CEO in their world, but he didn't care. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or market shares. He was thinking about Shinonso's giggle, Adi's cautious smile, Ifani's chubby hands tugging on his tie. He was thinking about Justina. Later, after the children had tired themselves out and settled into naps, Daniel and Justina sat on the concrete steps outside, sipping lukewarm sachets of water and letting the Lagos sun bake away the afternoon chill. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, breaking the quiet. "About how we met." Justina glanced sideways at him. "Me too. I didn't recognize you at first," he admitted. "Back in the boardroom. I changed," she said simply. "You grew stronger," he said. She smiled faintly, not arguing. "And you?" she asked. "Are you still the man who stopped in the rain?" Daniel considered it. "I like to think so. But maybe it took losing sight of myself to remember who that man was." Justina didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was low. "That night, it wasn't supposed to be anything." "I know," he said. "I wasn't looking for a savior. And I wasn't looking for anyone at all." They sat quietly, the city's heartbeat thrumming around them. Car horns, street vendors calling, the low thrum of 1,000 lives intersecting. Finally, Justina spoke. "You know you're their father," she said. "I do," he replied. "And you want to be part of their lives? More than anything." She stared at him, long and hard, measuring the truth in his voice, the steadiness in his gaze. "Okay," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly, a tension he hadn't even known he was carrying loosening in his chest. "But on my terms," she added, a glint of the woman he first met under that crumbling shelter flashing in her eyes. He smiled. "Agreed." The months that followed, Daniel became a fixture in their lives. He learned how to change diapers, clumsily at first. He learned how to read bedtime stories, stumbling over silly rhymes, earning giggles. He learned how to navigate tantrums, to comfort fears, to celebrate small victories like first steps and first words. Justina watched him, wary at first, then with growing trust. They didn't call him Dad. Not yet. But Daniel didn't rush it. He was learning that the best things took time. And as the triplets grew, so did something else, something slow and cautious but deeply real, between him and Justina. Love, maybe. Or something even stronger, a promise. Not spoken. Not rushed. But built, brick by brick, heartbeat by heartbeat. A family. The elevator dinged softly, and Daniel instinctively reached out to hold the door open. Justina stepped in, balancing Adiz on one hip while Shinonso and Ifani clung to her hands. The triplets were bigger now, sturdier, louder, full of endless questions and boundless energy. Daniel smiled as he watched them. A real, unforced smile, the kind that had become more natural around them. It was almost poetic, meeting again inside an elevator. This time, the lift was bright, clean, humming smoothly under their feet, not stuck, not broken. A far cry from the chaos of that first day when life had cornered them between floors and forced them to collide. Shinonso pressed the glowing floor button with a sense of accomplishment, earning a laugh from Justina. Ifani jabbered animatedly about the big building, while Adiz rested her head quietly against her mother's shoulder. Daniel leaned back against the wall, hands in his pockets, watching them with a mixture of amusement and quiet wonder. "How does it feel?" he asked. Justina lifted an eyebrow. "To be in a working elevator with 3 toddlers?" He chuckled. "To have come full circle." She smiled, softer now, as she shifted Adiz on her hip. "Feels strange. Good strange." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her, not just seeing her, but the whole journey written in her posture, her eyes, her easy strength. The elevator doors opened to the rooftop garden of Mart Tech Tower, a private space Daniel had spent months designing, but rarely used. Today, he had transformed it. Strings of warm fairy lights twinkled along the wrought iron rails. Tables draped in soft white linen held trays of jollof rice, suya, puff puff. Potted palms rustled in the gentle evening breeze, and in the center, a small banner read, "Family is the greatest business." Justina's breath caught. She turned to Daniel, surprise and something deeper flashing in her eyes. "You did all this?" she asked. He shrugged, suddenly shy. "I figured, we never had a real beginning. Maybe we could have a second chance." She said nothing for a moment, just stared at him, emotions swirling too fast for words. Shinonso let go of her hand and ran ahead, squealing as he spotted the food. Ifani wasn't far behind, his little legs pumping furiously. Adiz lifted her head, eyes wide at the lights, the open sky. Justina stepped out onto the rooftop, turning slowly, taking it all in. Daniel followed, his heartbeat strangely loud in his chest. He cleared his throat. "I know it's not much, it's everything," she interrupted softly. He swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. There were no grand speeches, no choreographed moments. Just a man and a woman and the children who tied them together in ways deeper than blood. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Justina's eyes widened, but he held up a hand. "Not what you think," he said quickly, opening the box. Inside were 4 simple, matching bracelets, braided leather bands, modest but strong. "For you. For them. For us," he said. She stared at the bracelets, her throat working as she tried to find her voice. "You don't have to say yes to anything else," Daniel said. "Just, say yes to being a family. However long it takes. However you need." Justina picked up one of the bracelets, rough under her fingertips, real. "Family," she repeated quietly. Daniel nodded, heart in his throat. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. Then, wordlessly, she helped Adiz with hers, then Shinonso, then Ifani, who clapped delightedly once his was on. Finally, she held the last bracelet out to Daniel. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, and for a moment, the rooftop. The city, the world, seemed to vanish, leaving only them. He slid the bracelet onto his wrist and looked at her. "No elevators breaking down this time," he joked weakly. "No," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears, "no breakdowns. Only building up, slowly, carefully, patiently." Daniel reached out, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. Justina hesitated, then slipped her hand into his. They stood like that, under the soft glow of the lights, the Lagos skyline stretching out around them, 2 people, battered and brave, choosing to try. Not because fate forced them. Not because of obligation or accident. But because they had built something stronger than chance, trust, forgiveness, love. Second chances didn't come with guarantees. But sometimes, they came with fairy lights, leather bracelets, and a rooftop view of the life you never dared dream of. And sometimes, that was enough. The sun was slipping low, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep purple as the triplets chased each other around the rooftop garden. Adiz was the ringleader as always, giggling as Shinonso tried, and failed, to catch her. Ifani, the smallest but fiercest, ran behind them, waving a half-eaten puff-puff like a trophy. Daniel sat on the wide picnic blanket, watching them with a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Justina sat beside him, her legs stretched out, her back against a planter box of hibiscus blooms. "You're quiet," she said, bumping his shoulder gently. Daniel turned toward her, serious now. "I've been thinking." Oh, she teased lightly. But she could tell this wasn't the joking kind of thinking. He drew in a slow breath, eyes following the children as they played. "I want to tell them." Justina stilled. She didn't have to ask what he meant. "They're still little," she said carefully. "I know. But they're starting to ask questions." About why I'm always here. About why I read the bedtime stories and show up at school. They deserve to know. Justina looked down at her hands. She had spent years shielding them, from judgment, from pain, from anything that could bruise their tiny, growing hearts. But Daniel was right. They deserved the truth. The kind of truth that gave roots, not scars. She nodded once. Okay. Daniel smiled softly, that small, real smile he reserved just for her. He stood, brushed the grass off his jeans, and called out, "Hey, you three." The triplets skidded to a stop, faces flushed, chests heaving with excitement. "Come here a minute." They trotted over, Adiz climbing right into his lap, Shenanso flopping dramatically onto the blanket, and Ifani plopping beside them with his sticky puff-puff. Daniel wrapped his arms around them loosely. "So," he began, heart thundering, "there's something important I want to tell you." The triplets leaned in, wide-eyed, trusting. "You know how some kids have a mommy and a daddy," he said gently. Adiz nodded. "Like Tolu at school." "Right," Daniel said. "Well, you already have the best mommy in the world." The kids beamed at Justina, who smiled back, her eyes glistening. Daniel continued, voice steady. "But you have a daddy too." Shenanso blinked. "Where he?" Daniel swallowed, emotion thick in his throat. "Right here." He touched his chest. "If you want, I'd like to be your daddy." The children were silent for a moment, absorbing the words. Then Adiz, with her quiet certainty, reached up and patted his cheek. "You already ours." Ifani grinned and tackled Daniel's leg in a hug. Shenanso, ever the dramatic one, flung his arms around both of them. Daniel laughed, his voice rough with unshed tears, and hugged them all back tightly. He looked over at Justina, and found her watching, her face soft and glowing in the last light of day. They didn't need fancy titles. They didn't need certificates or ceremonies. They had this, tangled limbs, sticky fingers, pure, boundless love. Family. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more. Thank you. They deserve to know. Justina looked down at her hands. She had spent years shielding them, from judgment, from pain, from anything that could bruise their tiny, growing hearts. But Daniel was right. They deserved the truth. The kind of truth that gave roots, not scars. She nodded once. Okay. Daniel smiled softly, that small, real smile he reserved just for her. He stood, brushed the grass off his jeans, and called out, "Hey, you three." The triplets skidded to a stop, faces flushed, chests heaving with excitement. "Come here a minute." They trotted over, Adiz climbing right into his lap, Shenanso flopping dramatically onto the blanket, and Ifani plopping beside them with his sticky puff-puff. Daniel wrapped his arms around them loosely. "So," he began, heart thundering, "there's something important I want to tell you." The triplets leaned in, wide-eyed, trusting. "You know how some kids have a mommy and a daddy," he said gently. Adiz nodded. "Like Tolu at school." "Right," Daniel said. "Well, you already have the best mommy in the world." The kids beamed at Justina, who smiled back, her eyes glistening. Daniel continued, voice steady. "But you have a daddy too." Shenanso blinked. "Where he?" Daniel swallowed, emotion thick in his throat. "Right here." He touched his chest. "If you want, I'd like to be your daddy." The children were silent for a moment, absorbing the words. Then Adiz, with her quiet certainty, reached up and patted his cheek. "You already ours." Ifani grinned and tackled Daniel's leg in a hug. Shenanso, ever the dramatic one, flung his arms around both of them. Daniel laughed, his voice rough with unshed tears, and hugged them all back tightly. He looked over at Justina, and found her watching, her face soft and glowing in the last light of day. They didn't need fancy titles. They didn't need certificates or ceremonies. They had this: tangled limbs, sticky fingers, pure, boundless love. Family. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more. Thank you.